It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. With us, France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent, who's unpacked after her most recent trip to Ukraine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Francois.
All right, good to have you. Nice to welcome from French broadsheet of record Le Monde staff writer Marie Gégaud, former correspondent in Istanbul and Moscow. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks as well for joining us to Joseph de Weck, Swiss journalist, author of Macron, der révolutionnaire Président, the revolutionary president. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We have not one but two biographers of Emmanuel Macron. Adam Plowright is France correspondent for the French news agency AFP. Your book is called, remind us?
It's called The French Exception.
The French Exception. Thank you for joining us as well. You can, by the way, listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Who is she? The whole world was captivated Tuesday by an EU flag-waving woman braving the water cannons of riot police outside Georgia's parliament. The opposition erupting over a bill that they say mimics the one on the books in neighboring Russia, would have obliged associations with more than 20% of funding from abroad to register as foreign agents. Well, whoever she is, she got her way. Parliament, controlled by the party of oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, backtracking and killing the bill.
Today is a very important day because Georgian dream dumped the law, Russian law, which was against the European integration of Georgia.
Marie Gégaud, this is, first of all, that iconic image, and now this. I mean, Georgia, we know they fought a war with Russia in 2008, but were you expecting this kind of a standoff?
No, it's a total surprise. It's a surprise also because Georgian Dream, the ruling party, is formally defending the Georgian candidacy to European Union. So it's so surprising that just now they are proposing this terrible law, which, as you said, was adopted in Russia, but in Belarus too. And of course, the European Union reaction has been that this was a blow to the fundamental rights and freedoms of people. So we still wonder why Georgian Dream had to present this law in the parliament.
Well, does it have something to do with their leader who made his fortune in Russia as first selling computers and then in finance as an oligarch?
Could be. It could be because if we look carefully, we see that now we see the weakest ex-Soviet countries feeling a lot of pressure from Russia. Not directly, of course, but we see that in Moldova, for example, there are a lot of demonstrations against the pro-European government. And here we see that the Georgian Dream government, which is not so much pro-European, in fact, it tends to be, but there is here a big contradiction. So it's possible that Bidzina Ivanishvili, as you said, is under pressure from Putin. It's possible.
Yeah, on paper, pro-European Russian media give him a wide berth. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the talking points. And you heard Marie Gégaud there, Catherine Norris-Trent, talking about the EU's reaction. I saw there was, tweets of support from the European Council President Charles Michel. But of course, he's got to be careful when he hits send because everybody in Moldova, Kazakhstan, and of course Ukraine are paying very close attention.
Absolutely. This is being watched very closely from Ukraine, where I just got back from. So speaking to people about what was happening in Georgia, I mean, they have a huge amount of sympathy for that pro-European feeling. They're following it very closely. People in Georgia, of course, worried that they could be next in line, or again in line, for some kind of invasion. It just shows how very fragile this whole area is. When I travelled to Ukraine, we went back in and out through Moldova, and the people there were telling us, look, there's this real undercurrents of instability the government resigned, a new one came in, talk about conspiracies to mount a plot, demonstrations. It's a very febrile region right now.
Yeah, because since you've been there, this very week, there were accusations by the separatist government in Transnistria of a Ukraine-backed plot to assassinate their Moscow-backed leader.
Well, there's all kinds of reports coming around and obviously very contradictory in their realities. The Moldovan government that just stepped down, the Prime Minister, said that they had got wind of a Russian plot to destabilise them. It's a really, really delicate moment, and it could, at any moment, we saw how fast this flared up in Georgia. It could really flare up again in any of these states, I would say.
Georgia's pro-EU president had vowed to veto the bill if it had ever reached her desk. Salome Zurabishvili spoke from New York Wednesday with the Statue of Liberty in the background. That did not go unnoticed in Moscow.
Мы видим, что законопроект снят с обсуждения.
We see this law has been withdrawn from discussion, but at the same time we see that somebody's hand's involved, and we can't say it's invisible. It's clear to see. It's not from Georgia that she's addressing Georgians, she's addressing them from America, and someone's visible hand is trying to add an anti-Russian element again here.
И чья-то видимая рука старательно пытается добавить сюда, опять же, антироссийские элементы.
It's all part of a superpower showdown, Adam Plowright.
We've heard that one before, haven't we? I mean, the sort of this idea that from the Kremlin, whenever there are any sort of demonstrations in former Soviet republics, then they tend to sort of come out and they see any anti-government protest as being essentially a plot from and the US, and that sort of instinct that you see to sort of blame America comes out on each occasion, not just in that part of the world, I would add, but yes, I mean they've. The Kremlin have been very clear. They see that America is being responsible for this. I mean, there's no evidence of that. The evidence seems to be that this is if you look at the opinion polls of where people see their future as being as Georgians, they see it very much as being a European state. A decision to ask for membership of the European Union was, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine is extremely popular. So it's obviously outside powers are being drawn in, but I don't see at this point that the role of the United States is a very passive one, is one of supporting Georgian democracy. But the idea that they're sort of behind, sort of fomenting these demonstrations, I think is pretty far fetched.
Joseph Dvek, where does this all leave Vladimir Putin? On the eve of the invasion of Ukraine a year ago, he was again hinting at this idea of the Russian world, the greater Russia, reconstituting the glory of days gone by. Again, I come back to that woman waving that flag in a former Soviet state.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why this war happens and why he decided to go into Ukraine is because he couldn't imagine that the Ukrainians would be on the other side, and that they would choose Europe instead of his world, and this sort of miscalculation is visible everywhere. If we remember, a year ago, before the war in Ukraine, there were some protests in Kazakhstan as well. And the Russians were seriously convinced that there was again an outside plot, etc. They could just not figure out or imagine that maybe it's just people who are discontent with the situation and want a different future. And this sort of basic miscalculation about where populations in these ex-Soviet states that 30 years ago broke free from the Soviet Union really are, and it's true, they're not all in the same camp, but there is some real discussion, real debate, there are differences there. That is sort of the root problem, in a sense, of why Putin has been trying to pursue this policy, and why it is, putting up against limits everywhere.
But Majigo, let me play devil's advocate here. Is time and geography on Putin's side? I mean, Georgia can be as pro-EU as it wants, but it's always going to have Russia as its neighbor.
Of course, this is a reality, but at the same time, you see Russia and Putin is weaker as ever. So maybe that's why we see what is happening now in Georgia, in Moldova, because again, Russia is exerting pressure against those states. And it's not a new story. In 2003, Georgia changed completely her foreign policy and was this idea of being member of European Union, of NATO, was on the agenda, pushed by Mr. Saakashvili, the first reformist president.
Who's now in jail.
Who is now in jail and in a bad shape, we have been told. So what is going on? It's always the same story. It means it was in 2003 in Georgia, then and 24 it was in Kiev with the Orange Revolution. It came again to Ukraine in 2014, and it was a little bit in Kyrgyzstan, also in Kazakhstan, you said. So it's not going to stay here, and Russia has not immediately. It's not possible for Russia to push and to have influence. I mean, who would like? We have seen these young people in Elysee. We absolutely understand that they don't want to be part of the Russian model. What is the Russian model? It's wars, putting opponents in jail in the better case, because we have seen that Navalny was poisoned. So Putin has went very, very far, and his model is not very attractive, I think, for young people from these regions.
It's not very attractive, but it can be formidable. Russia continuing with its campaign in Ukraine. Moscow Thursday carrying out its largest day of airstrikes across the country in a long while, killing civilians all the way over in the western city of Lviv, knocking out power in the capital, employing hypersonic missiles in what it called a revenge attack for last week's incursion by a pro-Ukraine militia in Russia's Bryansk region. Again, it depends what the objectives are. Josef Devek's right. Ukrainians are not going to welcome Vladimir Putin with open arms, but he can reduce the eastern and southern part of the country to rubble.
Yeah, and he can, as they do on these days of mass strikes across the country, sow terror anywhere in Ukraine, very far from the front lines, even right there in Lviv, in the west, where people generally have been living quite normally as best they can when the electricity's back online, the heating's back online. So that's the strategy behind these strikes, of course, is to take out energy infrastructure, which the Ukrainians, by the way, have been really successfully managing to repair in between the strikes. It's quite a remarkable story. But anyway, more of it's been knocked out now, especially in the Kharkiv region. And just to sow terror anywhere, basically to this psychological pressure that death can come at any moment, at any time. In the east and in the south of the country, it's pretty much frozen at the moment. I mean, it's quite artillery war, and they're trying to advance on foot, but the conditions are not there at the moment. Obviously, the town of Bakhmut is pretty much encircled by Russians. There's a lot of slaughter, mainly Russian troops being killed. I mean, it's frozen on the east. Everyone's thinking that come spring or summer, there's going to be a new offensive and perhaps things will move there.
Remember 6 months ago, those mystery explosions in the Baltic Sea that knocked the Nord Stream gas pipelines out of service, the ones that link Russia to Germany. The German prosecutors have now confirmed what reporters from German broadcaster ARD and newspaper Die Zeit revealed this week, that investigators have searched a boat, found traces of explosives, and are on the lookout for a crew of 5 men and 1 woman who hired a yacht out of the port of Rostock. ARD investigative reporter Georg Heil spoke with the France 24 debate.
So quite close after the attack, a foreign intelligence agency gave a tipped off, gave a hint, a Ukrainian commander was involved. There's lots of indication that points to the fact that this was committed by divers, not by unmanned drones, not by submarines. Therefore, I mean, everybody can have the theory and nobody knows the truth and can prove it. But if we talk about what is probable, what is police work finding out, then we are at the point that divers were involved, that not necessarily a state has to be involved. I mean, we have to take into account that any country, any organization that would commit such an attack would play a very risky game.
Josef Devek, of course, it's important to stress that we don't know the identity. They were using forged passports and for the rental of this yacht. But what do you make of these revelations?
I don't know. I think it's. I mean, history is plenty of incidents where we discuss even 20 or 30 years later what really has happened. You know, who killed JF Kennedy? What is the meaning of life? Maybe it's one of these questions we'll never have a proper answer to. And to some extent, right now, it doesn't really matter either. There is something that has been happening there, but the question now for the war is, in a sense, how do these revelations change sort of the political landscape in the West and support for Ukraine? And here, the main country we have to look at is how does it change the calculus in Germany? And I don't think these revelations, and we still don't know if it's Ukraine, if it's a private actor, etc., they don't seem to change the political calculus in Germany to support Ukraine, because the decision basically not to rely on Russian energy, it has been taken. We're not going to go back there anymore. And now it's more, should it be really relieved that Ukraine is behind it, then it would certainly dent a bit of trust into Ukraine. But I don't think in the short term we're going to see any political implications of this affair.
And of course, adding fodder to the argument of Josef there, Adam Plowright, is the fact that we've had a mild winter. Remember, the gas through the pipeline had already been suspended in September when these explosions happened. If we'd had big power shortages, would that public opinion have swayed otherwise?
Well, that was certainly Vladimir Putin's calculation, and when Russia took the decision to start limiting gas supplies to Europe at the start of the winter, his main calculation was that he would use that as leverage, to pressure European democracies against supporting Ukraine. Now, obviously, the opposite happened. That we had a mild winter. Europe managed to stock up on gas in an extraordinary way, secured alternative supplies from different countries, and really that the sort of gas as a weapon this winter. I'm not sure necessarily. When you look forward, possibly next winter might be more critical than this one, according to some experts. But certainly the gas weapon was sort of neutered to a certain extent over this winter, meaning that actually when the pipelines being blown up didn't end up having the impact that it would have done at a different time, as you say.
All right, Germany's defense minister cautions against any hasty conclusions that would point to a Ukrainian or pro-Ukrainian group. He was speaking earlier in the week at the same meeting of EU defense ministers in Stockholm, where his Ukrainian counterpart was in attendance.
For me, it's a little bit strange story because this story is nothing with us. And I think that investigation of official authorities will describe every details. Because it's like a compliment for our special forces, but this is not our activity.
Marijego, is that a denial or is that a non-denial denial?
I know quite a few states that would admit that they were responsible for such an operation. So we cannot say. The only thing we can say is that we have no information, as you said, forged passport, possible involvement of unidentified Ukrainian groups, non-affiliated with the Ukrainian government, which is really very murky. So I disagree with our German colleague who said that not a state, maybe individual could do this. I think that it should be a state. A state is behind this. So, but we have several candidates. It was maybe good for Russia to do this. At the end, Vladimir Putin scuttled Gazprom and Gazprom relationship with consumers. So why not to scuttle also the gas pipeline? And to put a relationship between Ukraine and Germany in trouble and hampering relationship because Mr. Boris Pistorius, German defense minister, said that we should be cautious, as you said, and he said that it could possibly be a false flag operation.
It's hard to imagine, though, the Russians would want to blow up a pipeline that they spent billions constructing.
Why? Do you think it had sense to begin this war and ruining the Russian economy, ruining Gazprom.
Anything's possible, Catherine Royston?
Yeah, anything's possible, and all we know is that we don't know, really, don't we? I mean, it was a highly sophisticated attack, so it basically looks like it involved divers taking large amounts of explosives and going down like 100 kilometres or something. To the
They say, so he said 70 meters,
okay.
not 100, and he says there's a big difference.
Yeah. Okay, well, the details of that are, so 70 metres and basically to the sea floor and detonating it and then, disguising the tracks. It's very sophisticated, isn't it? So that, of course, raises the question, state actor, non-state actor, authorised by Ukraine, not authorised by someone else or not. But it puts the doubt in there, and it, I guess, would put the doubt and levels of trust amongst Ukraine and perhaps some of its Western allies. The US have been slightly irritated with Ukraine on several occasions about various attacks that have been carried out or sabotage attacks. So, yeah, again, that could cause minor tensions or lack of confidence there as well.
Just on what was interesting is the attribution to the Ukrainian non-state actors. This came in a New York Times report at the start of the week that was unsourced, sourced to unnamed American intelligence officials. And I think if the last 20 years, certainly going back to when I started my career in journalism at the time of the Iraq War, if there's something we should be suspicious of is unnamed intelligence sources, distributing things. And I think it's important to remember that. That's murkied it.
The German investigation, though, relied on talking to actual policemen, and they told us a little more.
That's right. In terms of the yacht, but the attribution to this mysterious group of Ukrainians that were acting outside of the lines of command in Kiev, that came out of the New York Times report, and I think which is sourced to America.
Beware of unnamed sources.
I think we should all be healthily sceptical of.
Circle the date on the calendar. Turkey's president signing the decree this Friday that confirms May 14th as the date of the first round of presidential and legislative elections. After 2 decades in power, Recep Tayyip Erdogan faces the headwinds of inflation, criticism of earthquake disaster, incumbent fatigue, and a united opposition on Monday. After many a melodrama, 6 parties agreeing on 74-year-old center-left leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu of the CHP party.
The door of the Nation Alliance is open to everyone who shares our common Turkish dream. I salute our 85 million people, regardless of belief, thought, ideology, or identity.
Marie Jego, is this the face of change in Turkey?
It could be, because in Turkey, although Turkey is not a democracy, and under Erdogan less and less aspiring to democracy, we can say that elections are always a very real moment. We have seen this during the municipal elections in 2019 when Ekremoglu was elected. It was a big surprise.
Mayor of Istanbul.
Yeah. It was really a surprise. Nobody was expecting it. So it could be, and if we look carefully to the electoral surveys, we see that Erdogan is not in the best conditions. And the earthquake has probably weakened him a lot too. So the economy is in dire straits. So I think.
But the opposition has to keep it together. I mean, we saw this near row with this nationalist leader, Meral Akşener.
Yeah.
They reconciled afterwards. They had a dinner where they staged a photo between her and the candidate Kılıçdaroğlu.
Yeah, it was not a good sign, of course.
I mean, will they be able to keep it together until May?
It's a big question. And then, again, they are maybe not very... They don't impress the people. We don't know their program. They want to get rid of the presidential system because they say that it's no good for Turkey. But the game is open. That's what is interesting in this election, that the game is open and that after 20 years, and an incapacity to deliver what he promised, which is a stable economy, Mr. Erdogan is really in trouble, I think.
All right, well, the incumbent is not one to shy away from a fight. Erdogan confident he can run on his record, including his handling of last month's earthquake, the deadliest in centuries for Turkey.
That is why we want to turn the 14th of May into an auspicious race that will erase the traces of the destruction of the 6th of February by saying for Turkey right now.
This could go one of two ways, Adam Plowright, right? Because you have, on the one hand, the criticism in areas where the relief was slow to come, and on the other, this promise that he's going to hand out cash for those who are in need.
Yeah, I think it's one of, when you create a system, a political system based around one man, which Erdogan has done during his time in power. That's all very well when things are going well. When things turn badly, as things have done in recent history in Turkey with the economy and now with the earthquake, it's very, very hard to escape the criticism, scrutiny that comes with that. And I think that's going to pursue him going into the election.
Joseph Vivek?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. The last big earthquake in Turkey was in 1999, and that was just a year before Erdogan got elected, or AKP, for the first time came to power. And part of the election story at that time was that the earthquake was badly managed. And now history seems to be repeating itself, and we're sort of going full circle. And we again have an earthquake, and again bad management, and an election that is really competitive, as was said. So it's really interesting, and I'm very curious to see what it also means for for Turkey-EU relations, for the whole geopolitical situation. Greece, the fights in the Eastern Mediterranean. There's a lot to cover there, and see if such a government comes into place, if they will depart sort of from Erdogan's course in foreign policy.
Yeah, I just need to come back on that because those very significant areas, but there's so much that Erdogan has had a hand in terms of foreign policy. So you look at the Ukraine grain deal to export that from Odessa, and Turkey has basically brokered that and is putting that in place. So what would happen after that in terms of its relations with various states? Look at it trying to block Sweden's accession to NATO. Then you go back to the conflicts in Libya, where Turkey had a very active role, or in around Nagorno-Karabakh. It's been really quite aggressive on the foreign policy scene. So if Erdogan were to go, and this was the end, it would really change a huge amount in the region, really.
Turkey, which, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, for one side it supplies drones, and for the other it imports gas and oil.
Yeah, it's very. They play this. Erdogan knows quite well to play this kind of game. Uncertainty. It was maybe also a kind of a tradition from Turkey, because during the Second World War there were also with the Allies and not with the Allies, so they were unaffiliated. So maybe it's the same kind of thing. The problem is that he has a strange relationship with Putin. He has personified a lot power, and he has a very personified. It's not an institutional relationship with Russia, but a personal relationship with Putin. So maybe if he leaves power, from this point of view, but a lot has been done in terms of being very much more closer to Russia, and we know that. But just recently, it was yesterday or 2 days ago, finally Turkey decided to not to give the way to the export of products to Russia. Because Turkey is not applying the sanctions. It's the only NATO state that doesn't do this. So maybe there is a little change, but still Putin and Erdogan are doing a lot in the Black Sea. They have commercial deals between them.
And Marie, what's your prediction? 1 round or 2?
I would say 1 round.
That's a bold prediction.
But you don't know yet for which...
The last survey is giving 57% to Kılıçdaroğlu, who is not a very charismatic leader, so it's a surprise, and 43% to Erdogan. I think Erdogan will have a tough time because I don't see how he could. He's a kind of guy doing miracles, like he's a magician, and quite often the conditions are favorable to him. But this time, I don't see what he could do just to win, because I have the feeling that he's finished.
All right, there's a prediction. A lot of time left between now and May the 14th, though. Here in France, the president faces the wrath of the street. More than 1 million once again this week marching against his pension reform plan. For better treatment, Emmanuel Macron can thank, well, the British Prime Minister. Before taking the Eurostar for a Paris summit, Rishi Sunak gushing in an interview with French newspaper Le Figaro, calling Macron, quote, assuredly a great friend. Forget the days of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Friday's first such summit in 5 years paves the way for a visit by King Charles to the French capital later this month.
Nous avons une histoire qui nous lie.
We have a history that binds us. We have shared values that underpin the solidarity and friendship between our peoples. Setting aside what happens on the football or rugby pitch, but I won't go further into the sport references, given what we've got coming up.
5:45 p.m. Paris time, Saturday. England versus France, rugby. We're not going to talk about rugby right now. Adam Plowright, the crunch aside. So, first off, what do you make of that body language there between Sunak and Macron? Is that just Macron the way he's with every leader?
I mean Macron's sort of notoriously tactile and sort of hugs anybody comes up the steps at the presidential palace. But I don't think that we should read probably too much into the backslapping and the handshakes and all that sort of thing. But just their presence, together, having a British Prime Minister walk up the steps of the palace once upon a time, that was something pretty unremarkable. It happened every year. You would have, regular meetings. British government ministers would be in Paris and vice versa. And really, for 5 years, all of that stopped. I mean, it was, it's been extraordinary. This is, as you said, it's the first summit in 5 years. But it wasn't just a leaders' meeting today. You had 7 ministers from the British government who travelled with Sunak into Paris. So it was a major government meeting, and that is, a real. Yeah,
and it follows this breakthrough on on trade with the EU.
That's right. I think that helps, enormously sort of create an atmosphere in which, they could talk about restoring trust. And I think, when you listen to the French side for the last 5 years, that was what they considered to be lacking in the relationship, particularly with Boris Johnson, that they felt was somebody who would say one thing in public and then brief journalists behind their back and say something else. And you saw sort of multiple meetings sort of descend into, publicly it was quite friendly, and then it very quickly descended into sort of acrimony afterwards when stories would appear in the British newspaper, and it would go down very badly here in Paris.
Are you surprised that it's going this well, Joseph de Weck?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak is, since a long time, the first adult in the room in the UK. So he does a thing that adults do, and he tries to solve problems. And I think this is what he has been doing since he has been in power on the economy. If you look at trade, the relationship with the EU, now France, the migration thing that has been cooked up as the sort of big, culture war issue in the UK, possibly replacing Brexit, because there's more common sense there. So I think Rishi Sunak is right. He has an election to win in, I think, 2 years or something. He has to have a turnaround for his government. The polls are bad. And I think we're at a point where only decent results can get him somewhere. Otherwise, he's lost. Otherwise, Labour is there. And he's going for it. He has nothing to lose to go to Paris.
Catherine Norris-Trent, the pinnacle of this Friday meeting was this pact they've agreed upon for boosting the security, particularly near the port of Calais, and the creation of a new detention centre.
Yeah, well, that was the pinnacle for Rishi Sunak, because if you looked at the British press this Friday before the visit, they were talking about, Rishi Sunak's going to go to Paris and they're going to talk about immigration, stopping these small boats coming across the channel. It was very much his emphasis, and he announced the creation of a new detention centre in northern France. But when Emmanuel Macron spoke, he spoke a lot about joint security and Ukraine, and then he also, said, and also, of course, we're going to reinforce beach patrols. So they were very different priorities for this visit. Rishi Sunak is coming because obviously there's a huge amount of domestic pressure. There's a lot of scandal about the proposed immigration law to basically detain anyone who comes over on a small boat for 28 days with no legal recourse, and then basically ban them from ever coming back to the UK or ever claiming asylum, which is very, very controversial here in France, but also among part of the UK public opinion too. But he's got to keep the right wing of his Conservative Party happy, I guess, to try and keep them on board.
And immigration seems to be the issue of the French and the UK unveiling that pact after the new bill that was introduced, as Catherine says, earlier in the week at Westminster, and one that is certainly turning heads.
If you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum. You can't benefit from our modern slavery protections. You can't make spurious human rights claims. And you can't stay.
Modern slavery protections, that one's come in for a lot of mocking, Catherine.
Yeah, I mean...
What does that mean, first of all?
Well, they introduced changes to the law in the UK saying that you could appeal being sent to Rwanda or something if you said that you'd been basically a victim of modern slavery. So now they're trying to close that loophole, which has been widely used by lawyers trying to protect their clients, their asylum seeker clients. So he's basically trying to square a circle, and it's very doubtful whether this will get through the courts. I'm not sure about the UK courts, but then the European courts. I mean, they're on very, very thin ice here.
The courts, they know they're going to have trouble with the UK's courts, and they've said they're not going to leave the European Court of Human Rights anyway, Marie Gigot. So is all this a bit of a storm in a teacup?
I think it's a storm in a teacup, indeed. And then it looks so irrational what Mr. Sunak just said, that you cannot come illegally. But I mean, this is the fate of most of the illegal
because
migrants.
Because there aren't legal pathways to claim asylum.
Usually
there are a few exceptions, such as for Ukrainians, or there had been for Afghans, but there are many legal pathways to claim asylum without coming first to the...
The opposition's been asking, why not set up a migrant processing centre in Calais where they could tender those applications? Has that been on the table?
Well, the government has said when introducing the legislation that this was sort of the repressive side of it, to stop people coming, and then at some point in the future they would look at opening up some more legal routes into the UK, which, as Catherine says, at the moment are extremely limited. From what I understand of talking to people in France and on the British side on this, is that it's very much that is they want to sequence this, that the law will get passed, and then at some point they will look at it. And I would be extremely surprised if either France or Britain were happy to open an office that would allow people to apply for asylum around Calais.
Adam, I promised we wouldn't talk rugby, but let's talk political football here for a second. The government's plan in the UK has somehow morphed into a Twitter war, and now the suspension of former England striker Gary Lineker as host of the BBC's Match of the Day highlights programme. Now, it all started with Lineker calling the Home Secretary's statement, quote, beyond awful, and then it went south from there. Responding to one Twitter user on Tuesday, Lineker called it, quote, an immeasurably cruel policy, and talked about language that was not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. This, in turn, got the Daily Mail going, Britain's leading tabloid, putting Lineker on its front page, not one, not two, but 3 days in a row and counting. Because again, the BBC has announced that Lineker has to, quote, take a step back from presenting this week, Catherine.
That's right. I mean, it's basically a way to hit out at the BBC, which is seen by right-wing press and politicians and supporters as too lefty liberal, and they don't like high-paid stars like Gary Lineker openly criticising the government, and they say he should be impartial. So he was never once shown a red or a yellow card during his professional footballing career, but now he has been. So
Joseph de Weck, can a sports presenter give his political opinions on Twitter?
Sure. Afterwards, doing comparisons to Nazi Germany in 98% of the cases is usually a terrible idea.
It's not a good idea. You'd never win an argument that way, right?
So I think it's not fair. I mean, it's more nuanced the way he did it in his tweets, but generally it's just a terrible idea. But generally, this migration story, in a sense, I'm asking myself if it's all just a big comms story, because this migration reform, it's likely to be stroken down in courts. And I mean, if you look the way at how Sunak presents it with the big thing, stop the boat. I mean, this is like, it's pure comms. He basically wants to get in the Instagram feed of people who are attempting to migrate to the UK and give them a feeling of you're not welcome. His speech is, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. It's basically inversion. You know, we see it there. It's an inversion of Obama's yes, you can. You know, it's always what you can't. So in a sense, he tries to get to the migrants and reach them, you know, via these statements, via these pictures and social media, and tell them don't come. I think that is ultimately probably the goal of this policy.
Or British public opinion as well.
And both, yeah.
Oh, by the way, I said 3 days and counting for the Daily Mail. I would bank on the story again being on the front page Saturday, because Ian Wright, the former England striker, has said he doesn't want to be on the show if Gary Lineker is not
Alan
there.
Shearer.
And
breaking news.
Solidarity. There's a sort of, for our audience watching sort of outside of Britain, I mean, there's a sort of, there's this footballing royalty, isn't it? That's sort of all clubbing together behind Gary Lineker. But
the football has been at the forefront of speaking out on issues that involve human rights of late.
Well, it's interesting to see, footballers in Britain taking on far more political roles. We saw it with Marcus Rashford, the Manchester United striker, who has also been incredibly critical of the Conservative government. And Gary Lineker, and this is probably this is a continuation really of his views on the current government. I mean, he doesn't hold back generally on Twitter, but I think because this is such a sensitive point and comes at such a sensitive moment, and as Catherine said, people are constantly looking for any opportunity, to criticise the BBC from both sides. And I think he's ended up in the middle of a hugely difficult sort of moment for the government that are looking to sort of distract from that as much as possible.
Marie Gigot, is it just comms, or as Joseph was saying, and this will just kind of blow over, or are we playing with fire a little bit with this?
No, I don't think it will go further, but it's amazed me as this Gary Lineker is not a staff member of BBC, so why should he be tied to the BBC rules? And again, he didn't do it during his time on TV. He did it on Twitter, so why punishing him when he just gives his opinion?
And at the same time, you have the chairman of the BBC, the big boss, who, according to a Sunday Times report, a few weeks before he was given that job, while Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, Richard Sharp, the chairman, helped Boris Johnson to secure an £800,000 loan. So if you're going to question impartiality and where you stand, I mean, there are several big senior Tory party, Conservative Party figures on the BBC board. So there are real questions about its future, unfortunately, because it is a great organisation.
Gary Lineker, who famously once stated, football's a simple game. 22 men chase a ball for 90 minutes, and at the end, the Germans always win. Them are words that sting if you're a fan of Paris Saint-Germain, the team of Neymar, Messi, and Mbappe, unceremoniously bounced this week from the Champions League by Bayern Munich, crashing out at the first hurdle of the knockout phase. Fortunately, though, we're out of time, so we won't be able to discuss that. I want to thank Catherine Norris-Trent. I want to thank Joseph de Weck, Marie Gigot, Adam Plowright. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.